How much does the PS5 actually need that SSD? Is the PS5 about to get a permanent price cut? And is the PS5 strong enough for Unreal Engine 5? How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the midweek update here on PSReady. Before I jump into all this news, I want to give you my humble YouTuber request. Help me get to 200,000 subscribers. All you have to do is click the red subscribe button, or it might be white if you're in dark mode. Either way, subscribe to the channel and set your notifications to all because it would really help me out. So the first thing I want to talk about is this whole controversy that's kind of coming up again surrounding Ratchet Clank Rift Apart, because it just came out on PC and people are finding out that they're not only able to run it without a good SSD or even one as fast as the PS5s, but also that they're able to run it on HDDs. Now, Digital Foundry, of course, did an extensive test of this. They actually hooked up a PS4 HDD to a low-spec PC, and when you do the dimension shifting stuff in one of the cutscenes, it will load eventually, but it freezes up and it's not anywhere close to as instant as it is on the PS5. I mean, it's not instant. You have to sit through a weird frozen loading screen as the next part of the level loads. The interesting thing, though, is that the Steam Deck, which is well below the 720p 30 FPS recommended spec that Insomniac Games put out, it's able to run the game at basically medium settings and hold a pretty rock solid 30 FPS. The only time I ever saw it dropping was when that dimensional rift sort of cutscene was happening, and then a couple times it would drop to like 28 or 29 FPS during cutscenes. So like nothing too bad at all, especially on a handheld, right? I think people who've ever had a PSP, a PS Vita, or even have a Nintendo Switch now understand when the frame rate drops below 30 for just a couple seconds. So of course the Xbots and the fanboys are throwing around all these accusations on Twitter that Sony overglorified the necessity of the SSD, and so did Insomniac Games in the marketing of Ratchet Clank Rift Apart. And while yeah, I kind of think they did push it a little bit by saying, oh, this game is only possible, the stuff we're doing in this game is only possible with the power of an SSD, they did clarify later on that what they meant was keeping the fidelity and frame rate where it's at least in the performance mode or even in the quality mode, would be impossible in a game like this if you were running it on the PlayStation 4. And the SSD helped them keep that fidelity high while also having super fast loading, which is what they meant when they said they needed the SSD and the power of the PlayStation 5. Another thing that I think people need to take into consideration here, though, is the actual port work that was done as well. We don't know if Nixes put a lot of effort in behind the scenes to rework this game as they were rebuilding it for PC to actually take advantage of HDDs or slower SSDs a little bit better. Also, most PCs that you're going to be playing with these days, especially if you have a 30 series card or a 40 series card, are going to eclipse the power of the PlayStation 5 by quite a wide margin, just because you're going to be spending over $1,000 on that PC versus spending $500 or even $400 on the PlayStation 5. So it's definitely not a knock against the PS5, but there is a lot more powerful hardware out there. So what I'd imagine is happening for people who have slower SSDs or even HDDs is that the computer knows what's going on. It says, oh, I've got to load stuff really quick. So it moves all of that work from the hard drive or SSD that's slower over to the RAM, the short-term memory, because that's basically what RAM is built for, right? And most PCs that anyone's working with these days has like 16 gigabytes of RAM minimum, unless you're using a new MacBook Air or something like that. And a lot of like standard gaming PCs have 32 gigabytes of RAM, and high-end ones have 64 gigabytes of RAM. So I feel like a lot of that workload that's being handled by the SSD on the PS5, or if you have a fast SSD in your PC right now, could also be handled by RAM if you have a lot of RAM in your PC. This video is sponsored by Brilliant. Brilliant is one of the most intuitive and effective ways to learn math and science. They offer a ton of courses covering a wide variety of topics ranging from math to computer science all the way down to understanding AI. Look, I was never great at math in high school, and once I got to college, I did everything I could to take as few math classes as possible, so I decided to brush up on some of my more basic skills here on Brilliant. They have a foundational learning path, and I'm not gonna lie, some of the questions towards the end got pretty tough, but that showed me exactly what I needed to work on, and the picture-based questions they were asking made it really easy for me to learn. And the best thing about Brilliant is that it works with you. I told it I only had 5 minutes a day for a lesson, and it picked out one that took me a little bit less than 5 minutes, which is awesome. And it's definitely something that A, seems like fun, and B, seems like something I could continue with in the future and stick with. So if you want to pick up a new skill or improve your critical thinking, head to brilliant.org/PSReady today for a 30-day free trial. And the first 200 people who use the link will get 20% off of their yearly subscription. Huge shout out to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. Regardless, I don't really think there's much of a way to paint Sony or Insomniac in a bad light here. We've seen this game working on an HDD, and theoretically, yes, it does play, but you know, it has a lot slower loading than you'd see on the PlayStation 5 or a higher end PC. So that essentially proves exactly what Insomniac was saying. And this game can run on super low spec hardware like the Steam Deck super well. So when you're seeing it run on that low spec hardware, you see that it's an optimized game. So it kind of does prove what Insomniac was saying, right? Like, you need a faster drive to take advantage of the features of this game. If I'm being honest, the only thing that really bothered me about the marketing situation with Rift Apart is how often they made it seem like you were going to be able to switch between levels, whereas in reality, it's at predefined points within a level. And it's not to minimize how cool it is to completely change the whole environment around you, but the level layout mostly remains the same. Still, as a launch window game, I think this was a great title to show off how fast the PS5's SSD actually is and how powerful the PlayStation is, because even though it's a little bit of visual trickery, this is not something, as we've seen proven, that you could expect to see happen in the last generation. It proved why we needed a PlayStation 5. I wish more games had better feature utilization like this, other than like quick loading or 60 FPS at 1080p. Or those basic features we've become accustomed to over the past couple years or so are kind of getting old and a little bit stale. So I'd like to see more innovation leading down the same path that Insomniac started walking down when they made Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. So yeah, the instant loading is really cool, the higher frame rate is really cool, and I think that the PS5 is taking advantage of the SSD in a cool way. And this is just a weird thing to get mad at Sony about in the first place, because they're making the game work better on PCs so a wider range of people can play the actual game, which is like the ultimate goal of gaming for me, right? Like, I want more people to see how good these first-party PlayStation franchises are, and then they'll realize that they take a little bit longer to come to PC in the first place anyway, so they'll probably go out and pick up a PS5 to get more games that Sony makes, right? Like, you can either wait over a year to play them on PC, or you can go get a console right now that's going to match a lot of low or mid-end PCs in terms of graphics and performance, and it really does seem like a no-brainer because of the system Sony set up. So yeah, this whole controversy, the way I feel about it is that it's just as dumb now as it was back when it came up when the game was announced in the first place for PC. The one bone I have to pick though is that this is a PS5 only game, so it was $70 on PS5, but if you look at it on Steam, it's $60. Why are PC players getting that discount? I feel like what Sony should do is make the digital versions of these games $60 on the PlayStation 5 as well, like they did back in the PS3 days, where you could get a game for $60 at GameStop, or you could pay $50 if you bought it on the PlayStation Store as a downloadable game. So one thing that managed to slip under people's radar over the weekend when we got this huge info dump of new stuff about the PS5 Pro and the PS5 Gen 2 is that it looks like the PS5 across the world is getting a pretty decent permanent price cut to make room for this PS5 Slim. So this is just a rumor currently, but it looks like there's a lot of people who have heard this rumor and are saying that it's going to become a sale soon that's going to go on for an indefinite amount of time. So if you're in Germany, you're going to pay 475 euros instead of 550, which is a 75 euro drop, which is pretty good. The United States is going to get a $50 reduction, so the disc model is going to cost $450. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like they're doing any discounts on the digital one, because getting a digital PS5 for $350 would be absolutely insane. Like, that's a no-brainer price. And then Great Britain is also going to get a 75-pound production. It's going to be 405 pounds instead of 480 pounds, which is what it costs right now. The timing on this is both confusing and pretty interesting, because we just saw Sony announce a collector's edition PS5 that's also coming along with faceplates for both the digital and disc editions of the console. And I guess that the one that they had at Comic-Con at the event where this all went down could have been the PS5 Gen 2, because that whole situation where they're going to release that special edition and the plates around this September kind of lends credence to the fact that this new version of the PlayStation 5 is going to look exactly the same as the current model. And honestly, that would be both unprecedented and awesome. I hate the FOMO that you get, kind of like when you buy a launch edition console and then they come out with a newer, slimmer model about 2 years into the life cycle. It's going to be 3 in this life cycle, it looks like, but you get what I'm saying. Because even though that console doesn't run games any better, they usually come along with other benefits like a bigger SSD or hard drive back in the day, or you start seeing special edition consoles. And in the case of the PS4, I definitely think the PS4 Slim and even the PS3 Slim look a lot better than their launch counterparts. As much as I like the Spider-Man 3 font on the original PS3, I think the Slim is the best that it ever got. I didn't like the Super Slim at all. The like VCR top loader situation they had going on there was absolutely bizarre. But overall, the Slim models have traditionally been a lot cooler looking than the original models. I mean, even looking at the PS2, the PS2 Slim is absolutely phenomenal. So yeah, if they come out with this PS5 Gen 2 later this year, it's starting to seem like the only real difference is going to be that it's going to have a little hole in the back of the plate on the disk drive side where you're going to be able to feed through a USB-C cable to plug into the back of the console. And the other difference, of course, will be that it'll have an extra USB-C port on the back, which is also pretty cool, because I'd assume that port would be active for other stuff than just plugging in the disk drive. So if you just wanted to get a digital model and play your games digitally, you could just plug in your controller or like a SSD or something like that to transfer games to. The funniest thing about this whole discount is I'm pretty sure it might be only a discount in the United States, because if you remember, I think it was either earlier this year or towards the middle of last year, Sony raised the price of the PlayStation 5 pretty much around the world in every territory except the United States. So for a lot of territories, this permanent discount. So for 2 out of 3 of these rumored places, it's going to be more of like getting the price back to normal, but still paying normal price for a PlayStation 5 instead of an inflated price by around 50 or 75 bucks. I wouldn't complain about that at all. I still just think it's kind of stupid that Sony raised the price by that little around the world just to make a couple extra bucks on the console when they're already going to make money hand over fist on games in the first place anyway. But still, it's good to see some territories at least are probably going to lower the price of the console so everyone can kind of get a little bit of a discount. I totally feel comfortable putting my money down on a PlayStation 5 now, because even if there is a slight visual difference in this new PS5, I don't think it's going to be so massive that you're going to have FOMO about it, right? The only one I wouldn't pick up right now is the digital model, because even later down the line with this detachable disk drive, because even though they might add a firmware update later on to that console to allow it to use that external disk drive, at launch, it's not going to let you do it. So if you buy a digital model right now, instead of just waiting 3 or 4 months for the new one to come out, that doesn't really seem like the smartest move, because you're taking away your guaranteed option to add a disk drive later if you really want to do. If this discount does come true and you start seeing the digital model for 350 bucks, it might actually be worth picking up and just playing digital games until that firmware update comes out. So my next news story here is about Unreal Engine 5 on the PlayStation 5, because people have been pretty curious about how this engine's going to run. We have it in Fortnite and it looks pretty good. The whole nanite system they've developed looks awesome, but we haven't really seen it in a lot of games outside of that. And the new hot game to come out this year seems to be Remnant 2, which isn't really surprising because I've sunk so many hours into Remnant from the Ashes. But while I remember that game looking pretty good, I wasn't prepared for how awesome Remnant 2 was going to look. And it seems like the fact that it's using Unreal Engine 5 and a lot of those newer features might be pushing the current PS5 to its absolute limit. So instead of just having a performance and quality mode, this game also has a balanced mode where it's not going to hit 60 FPS all the time, but it's going to try. So regardless of what mode you're playing on, the game is going to cap out at 1440p, and that makes sense because even on PC, this game is super demanding. Like a lot of people with 4090s aren't even able to run it at 4K. So knowing that, it doesn't seem like it's the best optimized game in the world, which kind of makes sense because it is a new engine. The interesting thing though is that no matter what, you are upscaling from a pretty low resolution in this game. So the quality mode is upscaling from around 1300p, balanced is going all the way down to around 800p at 792, and performance mode drops all the way down to Xbox 360 and PS3 level by running the game at 720p and then uploading it to 2K, which I can't imagine looks very good. And the craziest thing is, despite the fact that this game is running at around 720p and it's balanced in performance mode, no matter which one of those you use, you're still gonna see frame drops all over this game. There's like a sci-fi interior type level with a bunch of corridors. That one really tanked the frame rate in the Digital Foundry video I was watching, and it can go all the way down to the mid 30s. But if you're playing in balance mode, you should for the most part get a relatively smooth 60 FPS for the vast majority of the game. There are just still gonna be points that drop down to the 30s, which is kind of crazy. And the reason Digital Foundry is going with balanced over performance is because performance, even though it's running at that lower resolution, to get it closer to 60 FPS, they also turned off VSync, which is gonna let it run over 60 FPS, which it never really does. But even though it's running over 60 FPS, sometimes when it drops below, you're gonna get screen tearing when you're moving the camera. And that's just kind of unacceptable for me. I understand some people can't see it, but it really does give me a sort of like a migraine type feeling. So yeah, I think for me, if I was playing this on PS5, I would be sticking with balanced. So weirdly enough, it is turning out that all the rumors we've been hearing over the past year of games starting to target 30 FPS looks like it's gonna start coming true as we get more games that are made for PS5 and Xbox Series X only. It really does feel like the stage is being set for that PlayStation 5 Pro next year, where they're just gonna say, hey, you can run these games at like 1440p or even 1080p and get a locked 60 FPS, whereas on the regular PlayStation 5, you'll still get a performance mode, but it's gonna be all over the place in terms of frame rate, and you're just gonna have to deal with it. The one outlier on PlayStation 5 is definitely Dead Space. That is a next-gen only game, and it looks like a next-gen only game when you're playing it. Like, it's just super detailed and gory, and it has great effects and everything like that, but the performance mode really does hold a pretty much locked 60 FPS, and it runs at a really high resolution. Now, of course, it is using FSR, so it's running at an internally lower resolution than like 4K or 1440p, but that upscaling looks pretty good, and I don't think it's running anywhere near 720p. Since Gunfire Games is sort of a smaller studio, this game is being published by Gearbox, it just seems like this game could have used a little bit more time in the oven, because it is hitting 60 60 FPS a lot of the time. It's just in certain situations it's losing it. So yeah, I think we are gonna start seeing a lot more 30 FPS games as time goes on. I wouldn't take this situation and use it as evidence that there's a guarantee we're gonna be dropping to 30 FPS totally across the board. I still think we're gonna see a lot of 60 FPS games in the mix as well. Anyway guys, that's all I have for you today. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.